Hi, my name is Mark Bernot. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about Russia, oil, the economy, Washington's move to place tariffs on our neighbors, and what this means for the geopolitical events in Ukraine. So there's a lot to unravel, and I'm going to initially talk from an economic standpoint, from a little bit of jargon, get past it, and I've got some ideas that I think are very important and relevant. But my underlying premise here is that I am a Washington skeptic in terms of a just solution for Ukraine. So hear me out. I know a lot of other YouTubers are jumping on the bandwagon and saying, oh, the guy in Washington, he's a wild card. We don't know which way he's going to go. Forgive me for my skepticism. Nobody can see the future. But in terms of the evidence, I think we can make some conclusions that have reasonable strength. So the first underlying premise is we want to say that consumption, as always, in the Y plus C plus I plus G plus NX identity, it's not a perfect identity, but that's the consumption component of national income, is usually the strongest. And as a corollary to that, oil is a very big driver of that. So in the dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium models and people that develop them in economics, like Michael Wolford, typically there was this one household, and it's a representative household, and all they wanted to do is consume one commodity all day long. They had more income, their permanent income increased, or whatever way you want to phrase it, they'd consume more of that. It's like a Sims-like family, just consuming that one thing. I mean, if it was me, I'd probably consume Ukrainian halva. It's this sweet sesame seed kind of treat. But I think the models are a little bit unrealistic, but they make some sense and they have modest value in terms of econometric modeling. And I think if you take that and extrapolate it out to the macroeconomics, we can say that the one commodity that the world in general likes to consume is energy. And that makes sense. Consumption, whether it's food, it creates energy for the individual, or energy, it creates energy for let's say oil, creates energy for industrial production and consumer enjoyment and utility. So that's the model that makes sense. If we look heavily at the oil markets and stress that as a prognosticating macroeconomic element and what's going on and why I can kind of draw conclusions of skepticism, let's see what's happening. The administration in Washington currently has imposed sanctions on our friendly neighbors to the north, Canada and Mexico, in addition to a small nominal sanction on China, 10%, I believe, compared to the 25-25. Now, oil is a little bit loosey-goosey as opposed to where this will go, but regardless, oil futures and oil prices are trending upward, and it looks like it's going to break through the $80 resistance as I'm recording this. If it breaks resistance, I think we can say the trend is intact. As a counter to that, Washington has asked or pleaded with Saudi Arabia to increase supply that will decrease the price of oil long term. So what we know here is this. When oil prices go up, consumers initially face short-term budget constraints, and maybe they curtail a little bit of their consumption. That doesn't yet feed into their 60, let's say even 70% of the GDP component that consumers could do. It's a small component. And the correlation usually is about, it has a price elasticity of -1 to -3. So when the price of oil goes up, GDP goes down in the short term. In the long term, it can be as high as -0.7. And these are pretty well-studied parameters and, correlations, etc. I use fancy terms. So in the short term, the consumer initially with expectations, or not even expectations, just naturally shifts from luxury goods to normal goods and normal goods to inferior goods, curtails consumption. And so that affects the economy a little bit. In the intermediate terms, planned events such as, let's say, vacations, maybe the price of air or boat travel goes up, and this will be curtailed. And in the long term, over a year, 2 years, really, industry starts to set back plans. And so we see this economic cycle, we start to go into a recession or depression. And typically, as I said before in previous videos, unemployment is the last thing you see go up, because if you've ever been a boss, as bad as bosses are, the last thing they want to do is lay people off because it's a little bit painful. But that's also for the stockholders. So unemployment is a lagging economic indicator. Industrial production, I would say, is lagging, but maybe even concurrent. And consumption, or at least expectations of consumption, it'd be a future predictor of indicator. So we can watch this as this unfolds. But driving it all is that one commodity model that I'm talking about is energy. We can say it's oil prices, whether it's Brent or Canadian. The oil prices are trending upward. What this means is that the one commodity country, that is Russia, which is really a resource curse, Dutch disease, they're deriving all their GDP to fuel this geopolitical event in Ukraine from oil. When the prices go up, no matter which way you slice it, with caps, restrictions, shadow fleets, somehow they will benefit. So the question is, why is Washington doing this? Why is it ticking off our friendly neighbors to the north? Like, I've been going to Canada since the 1967 World's Fair, driving up there. They are very peaceful, friendly people. It's the largest unguarded, in terms of military border, in the entire world. Why are we taking off our friendly neighbors to the north and south? It looks like we're starting to look at lay plans to get oil from Venezuela instead. Venezuela is a pro-Axis country. It's fully in bed with the dictator in Moscow, the Tsar of Russia. So that's the first thing you have to question. This, show me what you do, not what you say. Rhetoric is the important point. And that supports my underlying premise. I have right to be a Washington skeptic, despite all the hopeful, glowy, and I like to be one of them because I am, YouTubers that are saying, oh no, he's a wild card. The right thing to do is to look the camera right in the eye, Mr. Wildcard, and say, I support America as a great country. And I don't mean economic power. I mean in terms of ideals. I am always going to defend liberty and justice and freedom for all. Isn't that the right thing to do? I mean, it seems like if they start talking anything other than him saying, Russians go home, 100%, withdraw from Crimea, Donbass, go home, and maybe clean up your mess. Do it now. Then in my opinion, that is a very, dystopian Yalta conference. At least in Yalta, Roosevelt and Churchill were arguably very idealistic, good people, although they gave away Poland. This is much, much worse because it's a dynamic, changing, nuanced environment. Nuance is an AI word I always see coming up. Look for it. If he doesn't say in the camera, Russia, go home, very strongly, we are the greatest power. And I'm talking power in terms of transcendent power, not in terms of money and oligarchic power. Then I'm a skeptic, because anything else will be an unjust compromise and playing right into the Tsar of Moscow, their hands. As oil prices go up, as he provides sanctions relief, as he has warning, and he is communicating, he said straight out with Moscow, and when asked directly, point blank, did you talk to the Tsar? He said, I can't say that. And they asked him, why not? He said, I can't say that. So that's not a straight shooter to me. For me, that's full of baloney. Forgive me if I'm a skeptic. Like I've said in previous videos, he believes at the very best side of him, the best version of ourselves, that he's a savvy negotiator. He's going to walk into the meeting. He's the guy that walks into the meeting 5-10 minutes late, makes the other guy sweat. Not literally in this case, but he's putting himself out there as a negotiator. Let me tell you a Russian history lesson. For 500 years, all they've done is, I kaboom this, I take this land. If he negotiates, they take breather. Then they say, I kaboom this, I take this. And that breather might be 50 years. He doesn't know how they play. He doesn't know how they think. The brain has this multi-level brain function. And, the term, when it's applied to individuals that have very Machiavellian modus operandi, is called reptilian, because the reptilian part of your brain, controls this basic functions. I bet these water moccasins back home in Florida, and, they're not thinking about compromise and love. They're thinking about, do I strike or do I run? Okay? They're not thinking about, we're going to negotiate. So the reptilian part of our brain in this, pons, medulla, and extended a little bit outward is fully in play for individuals that have a Machiavellian approach to geopolitics. So the one thing fueling, as I've described, this empowering the Tsar of Russia is oil. No matter what's being said, what's being maneuvered, what speak is coming out of, news speak is coming out of Washington. I look at the sanctions going up 25% on our friendly neighbors to the north. And, maybe there's going to be some compromises with oil there, but either way, it's going to create disruptions. I've talked about the elasticity for demand and how highly correlated it is with consumption GDP. It's more correlated. It's actually 2.5 times more correlated with the price of oil with the Russian ability to finance and GDP than the U.S. I think it's 2.5. It could be even 3 or more times, 100%. So that is my claim, because we're watching these events unfold real time, that sanctions are going on that will create volatility at the very least, even if we see moving up and down. And maybe there will be a unsung hero like, BRICS country coming out and increasing production, or maybe China will help us out. Maybe there'll be some unsung hero coming here, but I have the right to remain skeptical. As a scientist, as a data scientist, I always say, show me the proof, show me the real data before I can cast judgment. And even when I cast judgment, I pretty much have to write, like when I'm doing an academic article, a balanced argument either way. And if I were to draw and then say, oh, this is an area for future research, it's pretty much the buzzword of academia. So it is an area for future research, but it looks like Washington is playing a card that is anything that is definitely less than Russians go home. Russians turn your tail and go home and admit defeat. The card is, we are going to create an unjust peace, because anything less than Russians go home is an unjust peace. And he's going to fuel that with volatility, not just increases in oil, but specifically volatility, which indirectly helps Moscow in the oil market, the one commodity macroeconomic world that I've created. Might not be perfect, but that's my premise. My name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. Have a great day. Thank you very much.